everyone. Welcome to a listening session from the Gulf States Newsroom. I am Priska Neely, and I'm the managing editor of the Gulf States Newsroom. It's great to have all of you here, and thank you so much for coming and wanting to listen to these stories and talk more with some of the reporters and the people behind the stories. Today, we're going to be digging into a series that we did a little bit ago called Place Erased, which is really exploring the impact of environmental shifts. What happens when a town is transformed, whether it's a natural disaster or it is something man-made that really changes things? And what happens to the people who are left behind? What happens to the culture and the communities? There are towns all across this region of Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana that have these stories, and some of our reporters dug into some of that earlier this year. So we're going to be taking a little listen and learning a little bit more about the reporting that went into this. So as I said, my name is Priska Neely, and I'm the managing editor of the Gulf States Newsroom. Before we dive in, I want to make sure that you know what the Gulf States Newsroom is. We're a partnership among public media stations in Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. So we have WBHM, Mississippi Public Broadcasting, WWNO in New Orleans, and WRKF in Baton Rouge. We all work together along with NPR to fill news deserts. You know, there are a lot of gaps in the region when it comes to coverage. So we have a team of reporters and editors who are helping to add meaningful storytelling to the region. We get support and really thankful to have support from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, NPR, the Commonwealth Fund, and the Public Welfare Foundation. And we've got a great team. Here are all of our faces. If you've ever heard us on the radio, these are the faces. This is something that happens a lot in audio. You're like, oh, this is my face. We've got a team of editors and reporters, and we cover issues like environmental justice, health equity, economic mobility, justice, incarceration and gun violence, sports and culture, and community engagement. So we're very excited to engage with you, the community, today, and share some of our reporting in a new way. So before we dive in and listen to these pieces, I want to introduce the reporters who are behind these stories. So this all started earlier this year when Danny McArthur, who is our environmental justice reporter, got inspired and teamed up with Drew Hawkins, our health equity reporter, to bring you these stories. So now we're going to bring in Danny and Drew to just tell us a little bit about how this came to be. And if you, turn on your video, then we'll emerge. So Danny is based in Tupelo, Mississippi, and Drew is actually joining us from Claremont Harbor, one of the towns that's featured in our series. So Danny, just to start off, you were inspired earlier this year to dig into this. How did you get this idea?
So back in January, I went on a driving tour of Cancer Alley. And in this driving tour, we passed by the diamond community in Norco, Louisiana. It was a community that's mostly Black, and it was bought out by Shell, a big petrochemical company. And so I started getting interested about what other places got displaced by industry. And then for the idea for this series, going broader, like what communities have faded away because of disasters, whether natural or man-made.
Great. And Drew, we know it may be a little loud where you are, but if you tell us, you cover health equity, and what was your lens when you entered into this series?
Sure, yeah, I'm going to have the speaker close to my ear because we are at an active bar in Mississippi. And I'm told that they're going to behave, but we'll see. I cover health equity in the region, and I was really excited I remember our editor, Rasha, mentioned this idea, and I had my first meeting with Danny. And actually, I had just kind of started with the team, and it was such a cool project to get pulled into. The story that I covered more extensively was the one in Louisiana, Revilletown, which, looking at that through a health equity lens, especially because it's so pollution oriented, that's the perspective that I was bringing to it. And, as you'll see with that story or hear with that story, it covers, marginalized communities, and their story is unique, but I mean, their story is, the people in it are unique, but unfortunately the story itself is all too common in the region. So it was something I wanted to kind of cover from the mindset of looking at the health impacts and equity perspective.
Yes. Awesome. Well, we are excited to listen back to all of these stories, and we are going to start in Louisiana. So we're going to start in Alabama. So how this is going to work is we're going to listen to the piece. We're going to talk a little bit with someone who's featured in that piece, and then we are going to go to the next place. So we are going to journey from Alabama to Louisiana and then to Mississippi, ending in that bar there where you see Drew broadcasting from. See you in a little bit, Drew. So we are going to start with a story in Alabama. As I mentioned, there are so many ways that towns have been transformed, and Danny McArthur starts things off in our series with a story of a town that really offers lessons about the hidden costs of progress.
Hello, how are you?
Good. All right, Woody, come on. Come on, Woody.
About an hour east of Birmingham, Mike Wadsworth's house sits on a road that drops off into a lake. It's one of the few remains of the town of Easonville.
Easonville was just kind of a wide spot in the road. We had about 3 stores, had about 3 or 4 churches.
His own family settled in Easonville in the mid-1800s, when it was mainly a rural farming town. When he was growing up, he says it was a prosperous area.
There were some places that you could have a row of corn a mile long, and it was just fantastic cropland.
In the 1960s, the state's main utility, Alabama Power, began building a dam that would produce hydroelectric power. It was supposed to be a sign of progress. The area was getting a green energy source. It would increase the value and double as a recreation spot. But there was a downside. Alabama Power began buying up property for the lake. Easonville residents had to leave.
I saw one man cry because he didn't even think he was going to get enough money off his 100 or so acres farm to build a house for his family.
And Wadsworth has vivid memories of houses and trees being burned to clear land for the lake.
And it was just like Hades at night, just fire everywhere.
Within 4 years, the dam was built.
Every day, the water would come up a little higher and a little higher, and you could see what it was going to look like. And it was just amazing to see that much water flood in.
Eventually, Easonville was underwater. Flash forward to today, and you have a town that only exists in the memories of former residents, like Joanne Winnett.
There is a picture of the cotton gin, and this is the house I grew up in.
We're in a hallway in Winnett's home. Photos of her drowned hometown cover it from top to bottom.
And the Methodist church, see that road right there, it was just on the other side, and that's the steeple. And there is Harmon's grocery store.
There is a silver lining here for her. She lives on the part of her family's land that wasn't flooded, meaning she has lakefront property now.
If I'm not busy, it's relaxing to look out at the water. And on holidays, there's all kind of boats, and it's busy, busy, busy.
Logan Martin Lake rapidly grew into a tourist destination, but the fact remains that people were displaced by its arrival. 60 years after Easonville was sacrificed in the name of progress, residents near an Alabama mountain face the same threat.
We were frantic, basically, terrified.
Fran Summerland lives near Chandler Mountain, in a community in northeast Alabama less than an hour away from what remains of Easonville. Her family farm, where her brother is buried, was threatened when Alabama Power proposed another massive hydro project. She wasn't aware of Easonville's buried past, but she can sympathize with what they were going through.
Well, that's what they wanted to do to us. I wonder if that community fought it or if they just gave up because you cannot believe how many people told us there's no use in fighting it, there's no hope.
When the dam that drowned Easonville was built, there were very few environmental laws on the books that would have given ordinary people the opportunity to weigh in on a project like that. But residents of Chandler Mountain, like Mark Smith, have a lot more firepower now.
From the outset, I was not in favor of this in any form or fashion.
This latest dam proposal promised to be a green energy source, but residents were concerned about endangered species, damage to the mountain, and the drowning of important cultural heritage sites.
We shouldn't be destroying our environment in the name of saving our environment.
Residents packed community meetings and pressured politicians to voice opposition to the dam project proposed by Alabama Power.
Because this is a smaller community and a lesser known place, they expected that there wouldn't be much pushback to this. They were wrong.
In August, Alabama Power announced it wasn't going to seek a license for the project after all. Now, the communities have started a nonprofit to continue their fight to protect Chandler Mountain. They managed to avoid Easonville's fate, a drowned town preserved only in memory. One day, there will be no one left, making Easonville a ghost town in the truest sense.
All right, so that was our first story about a town in Alabama. And now we are going to chat a little bit with Fran Summerland, who is one of the voices that you heard. So Fran, you were one of the voices that we heard actually from Chandler Mountain. So this is something that's happening actively this year. When you started this fight, when you were learning about this issue, this threat facing your town, were you aware of Easonville and what they had gone through 60 years prior?
I was not aware of Easonville. I was aware of some of the flooding that had happened because of the power company in years past. But as far as Easonville is concerned, I wasn't aware of that little town.
And were you, when you kind of started your campaign to push back and try to, stop your town from, facing a similar fate, what did you expect? Did you expect to be able to push back?
Well, I was determined to win, period. But you cannot possibly imagine how many people, mayors, politicians, told me that there was no point, that we were just spinning our wheels. There was absolutely no point in fighting the power company. We didn't have enough money. We didn't have enough lawyers. We didn't have enough knowledge in order to be able to fight them. But I was not going to give up.
And we'll have some more time to kind of dig into this at our Q&A at the end, but what would you want people to know, if they are, kind of daunted or feel like the odds are against them and they're trying to fight for their community? What would you want people to know?
I would want them to know that they can win, that no matter what anyone tells you, you can win and you can be victorious if you stick together and you work with the politicians and people have power. Small communities have power. Even if they're poor, they have power.
Thanks so much, Fran. And again, we will hear more from, our whole panel at the end of this. But for now, we are going to turn over to our second story in our series, Revilletown, Louisiana. So this is a story really about the impact of industry once again, but really focused on pollution. So when industry brings toxic pollution to a town, it often is affecting Black residents who are often at the crosshairs for relocation.
In the South, cemeteries are often more than just burial grounds. They're active, full of life, places where families gather to clean and decorate the graves. The Revilletown Cemetery was a place of refuge for Marla Dickerson. Generations of her family members are buried here, and the memories bring her to tears.
And we would come here, and we would just sit down, and she would point out where all the family members were buried. So It wasn't ever a sad occasion. It was just something that we did to celebrate our family. So, excuse me.
That hum you hear in the background is a chemical plant right next door. Giant steel storage tanks and smokestacks tower over the graves.
There's nothing peaceful about being near a chemical company.
In 1881, Revilletown was founded by formerly enslaved people on the banks of the Mississippi River, about 20 miles outside Baton Rouge. And for decades, it was a tight, close-knit community of about 100 or so residents.
You know, it was a happy, peaceful town with 2 streets. Majority of us were all related in some way, shape, or form, either by blood or by marriage.
They established a cemetery where it exists today. Marla Dickerson even has a copy of the original handwritten deed.
It goes back beyond my great-great-great-grandmother. She was a former enslaved person.
But then, in the 1970s, they got some new neighbors. Georgia Pacific built the first chemical plant about 1,000 feet from town. And as the site grew, it pumped out more and more pollution. Marla Dickerson remembers how a white powder, polyvinyl chloride, or PVC, spewed out of the plant, covering everything, including people's gardens.
Everyone who was like my grandmother's age grew a garden, but plants started to die, grass started to die, and so the water would turn different colors.
For the chemical companies, the site next to Revilletown had all of the characteristics to be a jackpot for manufacturing vinyl and industrial products. And that meant the town became one of the many sacrifice zones that dot the region, another place ravaged by heavy industry. But Marla's mom, Janice, wouldn't let her hometown go without a fight. In Louisiana, Janice Dickerson is a legendary environmental justice icon. But back then, she was just a concerned resident.
My mama started to do some research, and eventually a suit was filed. And so from that suit, we were relocated.
Dickerson got the EPA involved and proved that there were dangerous levels of toxic waste in the air, soil, and water in Revilletown. And by 1987, all of the residents were relocated, and the chemical companies had to pay for it.
There was nothing else that drove her. That was her passion. If there was an injustice, she was going to see to that that injustice was going to be handled, taken care of, slayed.
The town was gone. The cemetery was all that remained, and the community wanted to keep using it. But that toxic neighbor, the chemical company next door, decided to claim it.
It's very complex.
Chris Meeks is an attorney who worked with Janice Dickerson. Now, we could tell a whole other story about the complex legal wrangling over this quarter-acre patch of grass and bones.
True legal entity, juridical entity, possession, French, Roman law, possessory action.
The bottom line is, the companies say it's theirs, and that original handwritten deed, it just doesn't hold up.
There's just no one around to tell us. I mean, they're all dead. They've been long gone.
Dickerson and the residents of Revilletown sued the chemical companies for control of the cemetery. And while the lawsuits were ongoing, nobody could be buried there. Law enforcement once stopped a woman's funeral in progress, leaving a freshly dug grave open. Janice Dickerson was there, and she told local TV reporters that she tried to stop them.
And they will not take this grave over my dead body.
But in the end, that woman's family wasn't able to bury her next to her husband. The lawsuits went on for years, and they were still going on when Janice Dickerson died in 2021. And the chemical companies tried to stop her from being buried there as well.
It was scary. I lost a lot of sleep over it. I know Marla and her family did as well.
The woman who had fought for Revilletown and this cemetery for her entire life couldn't be buried next to her ancestors. It was an agonizing choice, but Meeks had to drop the case.
And, of course, it was always very simple to Janice. We've always been burying our people there. Our ancestors are there. My mother's there. Everyone is there. So how can this possibly be a complicated issue?
This isn't a unique problem. There is a long racist legacy of black land theft and black cemetery erasure, especially in the Deep South.
Do you think that you would have had, there'd be this much trouble, this much difficulty if it were a historically white cemetery?
Well, that's a really good question. I have to say that I don't think a historically white cemetery would face even a tenth of this troubles.
Meek says he and Marla Dickerson are planning additional legal action. They'll continue to fight until the descendants of Revilletown have complete control over the cemetery, and their ancestors can finally rest in peace. For the Gulf States Newsroom, I'm Drew Hawkins.
All right. Well, thank you to Drew for that story. And now I'm excited to have Marla Dickerson, once again, one of the voices that you heard in that piece, here with us. You know, it's been really interesting to think about all of the different issues that come up when we're exploring these stories. This one was, of course, environmental justice, but also a health issue, also a racism issue. Yeah, what are your thoughts, just having heard that, something that you lived? What's on your mind right this moment?
And I also say it's a socioeconomic issue,
Yes.
as well, in addition to everything that you just named. It's just very still mind-boggling to me that white people can devalue a legal document that shows that there was a purchase by a formerly enslaved person to purchase a burial ground for future generations of Revilletown. It still boggles my mind why this chemical company that has stated in legal documents through depositions that they had no anything in their offices in Atlanta or Louisiana at the time saying that they owned it. It clearly was not a part of the Rebecca plantation, which they claim. These are facts that are there. And so it boggles my mind why they would want to lay claim to a cemetery. The only thing that I can always say, and I agree with my mother, is that it is nefarious. It is something, it's a land grab. And this isn't something that is an issue that, you know, people who were long ago buried. We're talking about my grandmother, my grandfather, my mother, people who were a part of my life, my uncles, my cousins, relatives who I've known my entire life who are buried in our family cemetery. So the claims are still just astronomical and outrageous to me. And so again, it's something that I continue to carry on my mother's legacy, not only with her fight with the Revilletown Cemetery, but environmental justice as a whole. So it just invigorates me again, because again, these are my people. These are people who loved me and I loved them, and they are significant parts of my life. And so I know that I have to keep going.
Yeah, because it's so interesting when we think about history, and you know, this is real. This is happening now, and it's just so fascinating that, you know, this story is about this town, but I mean, the town is gone. Like, you had to move. This is the remains, you know, this is the cemetery, which just still has so much meaning. And even, you know, even like you were saying with that document, presenting that was, you know, this fight is continuing. I'm going to ask you the same question that I asked Fran Summerland. You know, I'm wondering, like we said, this is not the only time something like this has happened, especially when we talk about Black land erasure. Well, first I actually wondered, you know, have you talked, you know, of course, with your mom's work in environmental justice and your work also with the law, like, do you hear from other communities that are dealing with this?
So we during my mother's fight of this, we actually researched several towns that was going on, having the same plight and having the same issue. The thing is that, and I told Drew this during our interview, unfortunately, this isn't a sexy story. right? When we're talking about land loss, that's really taking a back seat, or even, dead bodies that are a part of this line, takes a back seat to the gun violence that occurs. It doesn't negate the fact that this issue is just as important, because you actively have people, just like in the late 1800s to early 19th century and early 20th century, where folks are actively stealing land that Black people have. And so this is a real issue. So really, to garner the attention that I think that this deserves, in addition to the other stories that we have researched and seen in other parts of the South, and even in the North, where you have just the erasure of Black cemeteries, and then someone comes back and says, oops, I didn't know that there were people who cared, or oops, we didn't realize that this was going to be important. And so having a place where we can all just get together and be able to really either have federal legislation passed and or state legislation is something that's going to be extremely important. And there is legislation in the state of Louisiana that protects burial grounds, but at the same time, we've seen time and time again that legislation has been ignored, and we do not want to be a part of one of those oops situations.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being part of this, and we're going to talk to you a little bit more later. We are now going to journey on to our next town, and we're going to go from, we did Alabama, we did Louisiana, and now we are going to take a journey to Claremont Harbor, Mississippi. So we've talked a lot about industry and, the changes that can come when power companies, petrochemical companies move into town. But there's also, a changing climate that is making some places too dangerous to live in. And of course, as the Gulf States Newsroom, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, we've got the Gulf Coast hurricane season every year. We experience these very scary storms that are changing things. In our last story in our series, we are going to go to one of these coastal towns in Mississippi that maybe has been wiped off the map, but it really depends on who you ask. So Dana McArthur's bringing us this final story.
Claremont Harbor, Mississippi is right on the coast. That means when hurricanes come, it's taking the damage head on. The community has been obliterated by hurricanes enough times that on paper, it looks like a ghost town. A local historian wrote about its potential death in 2019. The County Historical Society says it no longer exists. But tell that to the crowd at Harold and Lillian's.
We got reporters over here.
I'm a transplant, but hey, real people. Hey, you're in trouble now.
On this Tuesday morning, regulars like Michelle Eaches are already keeping each other company. No matter how many storms come, this nearly 80-year-old dive bar builds back.
The first places that open are the bars and the churches.
Because your whole life is torn apart. You need to pray and you need a drink. Bottom line.
That second voice is bartender Melissa Owens. My reporting partner Drew Hawkins asked her,
Do you think Claremont Harbor will ever fade away?
Absolutely not. No way. It's generations of, we're all related. So it's all generations of families here.
Some people might think Claremont Harbor is flourishing, but I don't.
Florence Jordan grew up here. That means she's lived through a lot of storms, like Hurricane Camille in 1969. She was just 17 when her family tried to ride that one out.
They're trying to put rags and stuff, towels and stuff at the door to keep the water out. And it's just coming in.
She remembers the moment when the 24-foot storm surge found its way inside their home.
I get upset when I start talking about it.
Her family ran upstairs.
So we go back into the attic, and we're sitting there, and we're waiting, and we're praying. And then the eye calmness, we're just very calm. And But we just stayed and we waited all night long until morning came.
Camille killed hundreds of people in Mississippi, Alabama, and Louisiana, and it did a lot of damage. After that storm, Jordan and her family decided to leave Claremont Harbor and moved a few miles away. But that's just one of the many storms that have eroded the spirit and structure of the coastal town over time. Each successive storm makes it harder and harder for the community to bounce back. When Hurricane Katrina blew through in 2005, it took a direct hit.
Katrina came along and just totally destroyed my home, my brand new home.
That's Jimmy McGuire. He's a lawyer who's trying to retire. In 2005, he had just finished building his dream home here.
And I still hadn't hung things up on the wall, and it was just a tragedy.
He came back to staggering destruction. Nothing but concrete slabs and rubble.
The Gulf of Mexico was filled with cars, trees, homes.
Many in the community say it felt like everyone else forgot about Claremont Harbor after Katrina. They have stories of pulling bodies out on their own and building makeshift shelters. Most of the attention went to bigger areas, like New Orleans, while small towns like theirs took care of themselves.
Rebuild was slow. The beach road out there took 5 years. I believe at least 5 years to rebuild a road.
While the chaos of hurricane season caused many to leave, McGuire chose to stay, eventually building the modular home he lives in now.
The evening I can hear the water, the birds singing and doing what they're doing. I see the blue herons and the egrets flying over in the afternoon going to their nest. And it's just such a beautiful place to live.
Today, if you drive through the area, you'll see that every house is on stilts. They have to be in order to deal with future hurricanes.
Because it's always been a wonderful place.
That's Lolly Cole, who moved here after Katrina.
Good morning, everyone.
She's volunteering at the Ground Zero Museum in nearby Waveland. It's dedicated to remembering Hurricane Katrina and the history of this whole county. She remembers coming to her family's camp as a little girl, walking down the long wooden pier into the waist-deep water.
And we crabbed and we fished off the seawall. So it's been a happy place. And then I met my husband and he had a blind date and he came to see me in Claremont Harbor. And here we are.
Claremont Harbor is unincorporated, meaning that if you move here, your address probably says Bay St. Louis. And while that area is expanding, Claremont Harbor residents worry newcomers don't understand the town's history. At least not in a way that will keep it alive.
I mean, there are people that just don't even know anything about Claremont Harbor that are still here.
She always tries to share bits of that history, like the fact the town once had 2 grocery stores.
And they both basically sold the same thing, but everybody that went to Garsha's didn't go to Ladner's, and everybody that went to Ladner's didn't go to Garsha's. It was kind of funny.
There was a snowball stand, and of course, Harold and Lillian's, just one street away from where Cole now lives.
I've been known to dance on the porch, listening to the music from Harold and Lillian.
This bar is the epitome of cheers.
To bartender Owens, Claremont Harbor is far from a ghost town. It has families whose legacies go back to the town's founding. Even today, it still has a 4th of July parade.
We have a better parade than New Orleans does, I'm just saying. Like, we have our own parade every year, and it's epic.
More hurricanes will surely come. But Owens says weathering the storm together is a key part of Claremont Harbor's identity. And just because a place is no longer on the map doesn't mean it's abandoned. For the Gulf States Newsroom, I'm Danny McArthur.
Okay. Now we're bringing in Drew Hawkins, who is in Claremont Harbor at Harold and Lillian's. And question for you to ask to the crowd, or if you can hear me, is Claremont Harbor a ghost town?
Is Claremont Harbor a ghost town? I don't know. What do you guys think? Is Claremont Harbor a ghost town? Where on the street is no, it's not.
Are you there with Melissa, Drew?
I am. I've got Ray's, who's in that story, is here, and Melissa's behind the bar as well.
Okay, well, we'll see if we can, summon any of them over at this point. But Drew, just tell me a little bit more about, where you are and what it's like there, and how, the first time you walked in to Harold and Lillian's, you weren't expecting to find this place, right?
Oh no, and what's really interesting is that Danny and I came to Waveland, which is right down the street, for the Katrina Memorial, where the Ground Zero Museum is. And we got really great interviews. We talked to a lot of really amazing people. You heard some of them in that story, like Florence. But while we were at the end of that trip, we were sitting in the cafe talking and wondering, we kept hearing about this bar, Harold and Lillian's. Everybody kept talking about it. And so we're like, well, maybe we should look it up and we'll go check it out. So we swung by, and I'm so glad we did. I mean, we come in on a random Tuesday and we meet people who all had really compelling stories about Claremont Harbor and Katrina. Walking in, I'll admit it was, maybe 11 a.m. on a Tuesday, but everybody was here and they were happy to talk to us and everybody was doing great. And it's just like it was today. This is not really necessarily a planned event. Everybody's just here because this is how much this bar means to the community. You heard it in the story. The first places that open are churches and bars. And I think it's just a testament to how, integral the identity, a community space like this is to a community like Claremont Harbor, which, as you just heard, does still exist.
Yeah, and when we think about anywhere that could be called a ghost town, it's pretty unexpected that you would find a robust bar there. Danny, this was the place that when we were thinking of this concept of ghost towns, Claremont Harbor was the place that was like literally not on the map, right? I mean, just talk a little bit about this reporting process for you and how this shifted your idea of, kind of the premise of what we were doing.
Yeah, Claremont Harbor was the place where I had like the least advanced information going in. Like I tried to obviously do like some research and calling around. Like I called like the Historical Society and I read like newspaper editorials. And like the way they talked about it, it was like as if Katrina was like the defining event. But it was like one of those things when I actually went there, like with Drew, it was like a completely different thing. And so it made me really think about like, what is a community? It kind of was like the psychological or philosophical ghost town. I was like, what makes a town a town?
Right. And you wrote a piece kind of reflecting on some of the things that you learned in going through this reporting. And that last line of the story is just because a place, isn't on a map doesn't mean that it's abandoned, doesn't mean that it's changed. This is so interesting in thinking about areas along the coast too, because there's not, the fight when you're fighting, it's not the same as, fighting against a company or chemical company or something. So some of these stories of those areas that were transformed by climate change are a little bit different. I wonder for you, Danny or Drew, in thinking about towns like this, what, it's a little bit more complicated. Drew?
Yeah, sorry. I think what was really compelling about this was you do this research externally, you look into something, you look online, you make some phone calls, but you really have to come out here to kind of get to the truth of the matter. And I think that was the most surprising thing was that when we came out, not only was everyone familiar with it, but they were able to give stuff that you would never be able to find without, actually coming out and talking to people around what was once Claremont Harbor and still is to many.
Yes. Okay. Well, we are going to bring in some of the other panelists back on so we can ask a little bit about kind of reactions to the piece. Drew, I wonder, since you're there, have you heard anything about how people reacted? I mean, we've heard that it's, not a ghost town in the eyes of everyone there, obviously. But any reactions to kind of having this story told?
Yeah, well, first of all, they were very impressed that anyone even heard of Claremont Harbor. I think it's almost like a secret to people who live around here. So everyone was very, very happy with having themselves mentioned. And I think especially when you come to a small bar like this, where half the people in the story are here, and they all know each other, they're all regulars for decades now. Just having their story told that they've all known and they've all shared, having that shared, I think was really important and really powerful for them.
Yes. Well, reminder, if you have any questions, you can put them into the Q&A feature, or I see some people dropping them to the chat. I'll get to them that way as well. Fran and Marla, I'm just wondering for you, I don't know if you'd listened to all the stories before, but, how did hearing about the other places, I'll start with you, Fran, how did hearing about, the Revilletown and Claremont Harbor, how did that make you think about your own experience in Chandler Mountain?
Well, I think one of the things that touched me is the fact that those are communities that are still communities. They have not disappeared, because I think community is people. It's not necessarily a piece of property. And I think one thing that we learned here in Steele is that we learned that we had a community. We created a community by sticking together and fighting. When tragedy happens or near tragedy, it brings people together. And I can see that the people in the other towns are still together. They've still been brought together. Now, Easonville is a sad commentary because I don't think it is quite as together as the other places. I mean, it's disappeared. But I wondered if the people in Easonville at that time actually felt like they could fight. And that makes me really sad. That they may have been told, just as I was and just as we all were, that there was no reason to fight. I wonder if they were told the same thing and they didn't have like the environmental laws that we have today. So it really saddens me that they may have just succumbed to a powerful entity.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that, Danny, we touched on in the piece is that, there have been different changes in laws over the past 60 years that have given communities kind of different opportunities to push back. Marla, I wonder for you, listening to those other stories, what themes, how does that change or complicate how you think about your own situation with Revilletown?
Well, the theme throughout is resilience and grit for people who are fighting for places that they are connected to, that they love, that they hold near and dear. The unfortunate part with Revilletown is that we were displaced, and because you had generations of people who were there, this disrupted lifestyles. This disrupted the community that we had. It was no longer us, as I said in the piece, it's two streets. And we were all connected either by blood or by marriage. And it was dead end streets. So there wasn't a necessity for us to be afraid. We children, I would stay outside and play. My cousins would stay outside and play. We went to neighbors' homes because they were family members. And so that wreaked havoc, you know, on the psyche of individuals. I was 8, well, 7.5 when we had to leave. But, you know, for my grandmother, who was in her 50s at the time, who had lived in and around that area all her life, and, you know, was in spaces and places where her mother lived and her grandmother lived and her great grandmother lived. It took a toll on everybody. And so, but one of the things that also was unfortunate, and this is a story, and I commend Fran and her community for staying together. We all know that when there are power dynamics in play, that those power dynamics want to divide and conquer, because that's a strategy in order for them to win. And unfortunately, everyone in Revilletown who was in Revilletown did not want to come forward and fight because they were afraid. And the same thing that Fran was told, my mama was told on several occasions, like, who do you think you are? You're fighting a large chemical company. You're not going to win. You know, they employ people in the community. They give to political contributions to judges. And so it's going to be a wait and see game. And so that's really the unfortunate part, because there is a driver of fear. There is a driver of tearing communities apart that allows the power dynamic to thrive. And so that's one of the things, you know, building this capacity, you know, and showing people that, you know, you don't have to be afraid to lose your job, or, you know, these are the things that they do. They prey on folks to lose their job, whether or not you have enough money to fight. And so building capacity is also something that's extremely important, because the wonderful thing about my mother is she was a leader. And sometimes we know that we have to fight, sometimes alone, until we have people who have enough strength and resilience to come. But thankfully, she was not completely alone. She had people like my cousin Vivian Shafay, whose family is buried back there, who was fighting along, and a couple of other cousins who were there. And so they held strong and they held fast. And so hoping that eventually, you know, everyone will see that together we are stronger and better, because at the end of the day, we all go back there. We all visit our loved ones. We visit on holidays, and All Saints Day and Christmas and birthdays and Mother's Days and Father's Days. So, you know, that's grit, resilience, and capacity, I would say, is what I see in all the stories.
Yes. And yeah, thank you so much for that idea of, you know, grit, resilience. We are going to go over to Drew now, because you have summoned Melissa Owens from behind the bar on a busy day at Harold and
I have pulled her
Lillian's.
away before the people revolt, and she must return. I have Melissa Owens here from the story you just heard, and very much in line with this idea of resiliency and grit. You know, the question I'd ask her is, you know, what do you think the future of Claremont Harbor looks like? People maybe outside of it don't even know it exists, but it's very real to people who live here. What does the future look like?
Absolutely. We were the entire land mass. We were the forgotten little zone that was completely wiped away 1,000%. But everybody came together here. We put tents up, we got water, we got everything going, and now we're back rolling. We're not built back 100%. And well, like I said, we never will be, but this bar has been here 77 years, and everybody comes together. Christmas, benefits, anybody needs anything, we stick together as a whole family. So when they say, oh, what's Claremont Harbor? Well, you just got to come here and find out for yourself, and have a drink while you're here.
Thanks so much, Melissa, for stepping away. We did get a question from someone. How do you navigate telling younger generations about it? You know, when kind of memories fade, like, what do you tell the children about this area?
So I think that there is a historical tradition in the Black community, because there hasn't always been records that have been kept, basically from birth certificates to, marital records. So this is oral history. And this is how I and my sisters and my nieces and nephews know of the history of Revilletown before we came into existence, because there is a oral history that we keep going. And part of that is my mom was very intentional about making sure that we had pride and love for those who had passed on before us, because of course those are people who made her who she was. And so because I've never met my great-great-grandmother, my great-grandmother was still alive when up until the age I was 11. So I knew her very well. But I've never met my great-grandmother. I've never met my grandfather because he died before I was born. But those people are naturally ingrained in me because of the stories that they have told. And so because she allowed them to become a piece of me, through her oral histories and the oral histories that she had, I continue to fight and stand on their shoulders as well. So this is how I pass it on to the younger generations, for people who are younger than me, my nieces and nephews who never lived in Revilletown, but understand the importance of what that means to our family and how we celebrate our ancestors and those who have gone on before us.
Yeah, thank you. And Danny, when you were in Easonville, talking to some of the older folks who, actually grew up in that town before it was drowned, how were they talking about it? I know they had photos, but, was it something that they were talking about with, with relatives, with other generations?
I'm not sure. Like, that was the thing about with the Easonville, like the sources I talked to were like much older, like I think in their 80s. And so it is almost like the generations of people who had direct ties to Easonville are like dying off, kind of thing. And that was something I came across like when I was doing the reporting and reaching out to folks. Like, there was very specific, like if you asked about who remembers Easonville, there's like very specific people you could talk to. And they were all pretty much older.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that we have been able to bring the stories of these towns alive with this reporting, and really just want to thank Danny for bringing this idea to the forefront, to Drew for hopping in, to Rasha McChesney, our editor, and to Orlando Flores Jr. for bringing all these stories together online. And thank you so much also to Fran Summerland and Marla Dickerson for being here as real people living these, not only for participating in the stories, but being part of this as well. So we are about to wrap here. Before we depart, we do have a little survey that we'd love for you to fill out to give us some feedback and to tell you about things that will be coming up in the future. And if you have ideas, for other towns that we should look into, towns with stories about big changes that have shifted the definition of community, we would love to hear from those as well. Thank you everyone who has tuned in today. Exciting to see you all here. Thank you for your attention and your questions. We have, maybe we can drop the link to the survey as well. We'll send a follow-up email also to keep in touch with folks. But maybe Rasha, you can go back to the subtext slide. And if you haven't signed up, we do keep in touch with our audience through text as well. So, we're on the radio on your local stations, WBHM, MPB, WRKF, WWNO, but also all of our stories are online. And if you're worried about missing any of them, you can sign up for our subtext, which is a text distribution service. So you can scan that that QR code right there, or you can just send a simple text. You can text the word news to 205-537-9580. Thanks again, everyone, so much for being here. And the Gulf States Newsroom thanks you. And, stay tuned, because we'll be doing more of these and continuing to amplify the stories that we are telling. Thanks, everyone.